The cold November air hangs heavy over Hereford's marketplace, thick with anticipation and the stink of too many bodies pressed together. Nobles, priests, merchants, and beggars, all eyes fixed on a rough wooden scaffold rising above the mob like a sacrificial altar. There shackled and gaunt stands a man who once bent the kingdom to his will. Hugh Despenser, Lord Favorite, the secret shadow at King Edward's side, now nothing but prey for the pack. His face, drained by days of hunger and terror, is a pallid mask stretched tight over bone. The velvet and gold of courtly days have rotted to rags and grime. Each step he takes is forced by guards who once bowed in his presence. The jeers of the crowd bite deeper than chains. This is no ordinary execution, but a spectacle, an act of vengeance, a public sacrifice meant to cauterize the memory of his ambition with blood and fire. In mere hours, his body will be torn asunder, left in pieces as a warning to all who would rise too high, too fast, or too close to the throne. Despenser's mind, once sharpened on secrets and schemes, reels as he scans the faces before him. There is no mercy here, no hope of pardon. He can taste the iron tang of fear, the oily smoke of torches, the sickly sweetness of his own sweat. Every sound, priest's prayers, the muttered curses, the howl of the mob, drives splinters into his skull. He remembers with cruel clarity how he once whispered in the king's ear, made lords tremble, rewrote the order of England for his own pleasure and gain. Now power is gone. All that remains is flesh exposed and trembling, awaiting the butcher's art. The scaffold creaks. Ropes bite into his wrists. Cold metal gleams, ready to unmake what once seemed inviolable. The crowd leans forward, hungry for the spectacle of destruction, their eyes reflecting torchlight and hatred. This stage wood iron and malice becomes the sum of Despenser's world, shrinking his universe to pain and shame. Born to privilege, raised among lords and kings, he climbed higher than most dared dream. He learned early the art of survival, the power of charm and calculation. But in the end, every connection became a noose. The rise of Edward II had been Despenser's own ascent, the king's forbidden affections, his secret passage into influence. Yet every stolen moment, every arrogant word, every betrayal carved a mark deeper than any blade. Now, stripped and condemned, Despenser stands as a caution carved in flesh. The past is a chain that drags him to the scaffold where the only crown he wears is shame and the only kingdom left is agony. The square echoes with the judgment of England, a chorus of rage, envy, and the cold democracies of death. And so, as the knives and hooks close in, Despenser learns what all tyrants learn too late. The higher the climb, the harder the fall, and in the end, the mob remembers only your scream. Imagine the spectacle a man once feared and envied, whose whispers shaped the king's every waking hour, whose hands closed around wealth and privilege as easily as a strangler's grip. Hugh Despenser. His rise was swift and merciless, the air in Edward II's court thick with the scent of new power and old resentments. By 1316, Despenser had ensnared the king's confidence, becoming chamberlain keeper of the royal secrets, the shadow at Edward's shoulder, the spider at the center of the web. The castle's corridors knew his footsteps well. Marriage to Eleanor de Clare, the king's own niece, delivered him the fertile lands of Glamorgan, another jewel for a man whose appetite for domination knew no limit. Behind closed doors, alliances deepened. Outside, the court whispered of favoritism, of a bond that twisted far beyond blood or duty. As Despenser's presence grew, so did his greed. He stretched out cold hands and seized what he wanted, lands stolen by cunning legal schemes, inheritances wrenched from the grasp of noble widows, even his own kin reduced to prey. His ruthlessness was legend. A sister-in-law stripped of her birthright, nobles driven to despair, justice warped to feed his ambition. When rebellion surged and Despenser was exiled, he turned to piracy, ravaging English ships, laughing at the law he once bent to his will. Yet exile could not hold him. When Edward clawed back his throne, Despenser returned hungrier, colder, more untouchable than ever. From 1322 to 1326, father and son became the marrow of England's government. Despenser the Younger was everywhere, the hand on the royal purse, the voice in the king's ear, the shadow behind every decree. Jean Froissart would write, "He was king of England in everything but name." The court seethed with rumors, glances that lingered too long, words half swallowed the sickly perfume of scandal hanging in the torchlit air. All the world noticed. Despenser, husband and father, found his private life dissected by rumor and hate. Chronicles called him sodomite, a word that stank of heresy and doom. For the church, for the nobility, for all those who believe power should serve order, his transgressions, real or imagined, became the stench that could not be masked. Queen Isabella, cold and patient, nursed a fury sharpened by humiliation. The stage was set. The crowd murmured, torches guttered, and somewhere in the darkness, the scaffold waited. Power once absolute is always a borrowed flame. In Despenser's world, the shadows lengthen, and the price of arrogance gathers in the cold, expectant hush before the axe. A man who once whispered commands into a king's ear, who set queens trembling and noblemen cowering, now finds himself the architect of his own ruin. The icy hand of vengeance closes on Hugh Despenser, and England, long bled by his greed, drinks deeply of his humiliation. Isabella, once queen in all but name, watched as her power withered beneath Hugh's shadow. Her wealth stripped away, her household broken, even her own children pried from her arms and placed in the keeping of Despenser's wife. The queen, abandoned in her own palace, turned her hatred inward, letting it fester and sharpen until exile offered the first taste of freedom. France became her refuge, and there she met Mortimer, escapee outlaw, hungry for retribution. Together they schemed in candlelit chambers, their pact forged in betrayal and longing. In September 1326, vengeance returned to English shores. Isabella and Mortimer landed with mercenary blades, but it was not their numbers that struck terror into Despenser's heart. It was the tidal wave of English lords, long humiliated, who rallied at the promise of his fall. For years he had ground them beneath his heel, extorting, imprisoning, despising. Now their loyalty collapsed like rotten timber. Edward II and the Despensers, stripped of every illusion, fled west with chests of gold clutched tight. Despair turned their flight into farce. Father and son were wrenched apart. Hugh the Elder, snared in Bristol, dragged before a howling mob. He was hanged in his armor, beheaded, his body quartered and thrown to the dogs. Decades of royal service erased in a single day's savagery. Hugh the Younger, hunted and desperate, ran with his doomed king through the sodden Welsh countryside, haunted by the silence of abandoned allies, and the memory of power turned to ash. Starvation was his chosen escape, a final futile bid for control over a fate already sealed. But fate was merciless. Captured near Neath, Hugh was paraded in chains, filthy and gaunt, before a tribunal, more execution than trial. Roger, Mortimer, Isabella, the Lancastrian barons, every face a monument to his crimes. They named him traitor, thief, corrupter of kings. The list of accusations curled like smoke through the cold air, but the verdict was written in the eyes of those who had come to watch him fall. They would dress this vengeance as law-draping legal formality over the raw wound of personal hatred. Every moment in that hall pressed humiliation into Hugh's marrow. Every word, every gaze stripped him further of the dignity he had so ruthlessly stolen from others. In the shadowed square, with torches guttering and the scent of blood already thick, Hugh Despenser came to know the full cost of power. Pride had been his armor, but the mob would have it flayed from his bones. And so the man who ruled through terror met terror in the end. His legacy not carved in stone, but in screams, in shame, in the bitter knowledge that power dies in darkness, and the scaffold remembers long after crowns have turned to dust. Morning claws its way across the gray skies of Hereford. The marketplace is alive with a feverish anticipation, a sea of faces twisted by vengeance, nobles and beggars alike, craning to witness the fall of a man once second only to the king. Hugh Despenser, stripped of title and hope, is dragged into the open chains, biting deep, his breath sharp with terror. Once he whispered in royal shadows his will, law, his word, fate. Now the scaffold towers above him, a stage for the anatomy of humiliation. He is bound to a ladder lashed so high that none can look away from his agony. A crown of nettles is forced onto his brow, a parody, a cruel echo of the crown he wore in Edward's confidence. Verses of condemnation, biblical wounds, are inked onto his flesh, for all to see, each line a public curse, each word a nail in the coffin of pride. The crowd seethes, waiting hungry for spectacle. The torture begins. There is no mercy. The executioner's faces, blank with purpose, take a knife to his groin. Despenser's genitals are severed and cast into the fire before his eyes smoke, coiling into the morning air. The scent of burning flesh mingles with the crowd's roar. This punishment, chosen for its symbolic cruelty, is meant to erase not just the man, but his sins, real or imagined, against both crown and nature. He remains conscious. His abdomen is opened with slow, deliberate horror. Entrails spill out hissing in the flames. The agony is primal, his scream a sound that is not human, knifes through the square and echoes from stone to stone, a hymn of retribution that delights his accusers. Only when his spirit is shattered and his body broken is he allowed the mercy of death. He is hanged, then beheaded, his corpse quartered and scattered to the corners of the realm, a warning nailed into the marrow of England. His head, impaled above the city gate, stares down on London's cold streets, lips twisted in the rictus of final disgrace. This was vengeance made flesh, punishment calculated to expiate every transgression and every rumor of corruption, to cleanse the kingdom with fire and steel. His mutilation is a ritual, a spectacle meant to purge not only Despenser, but the very memory of his influence over Edward, their whispered secrets, the shadow of forbidden passion. The castration, the burning, the division of his body, all are judgments rendered in blood, each act an exorcism of what he had brought into the heart of power. Years later, Eleanor de Clare, his widow, is granted the right to gather what little remains: a head, a femur, a handful of shattered fragments. All that endures of Hugh Despenser, once the architect of a kingdom's fate, is dust and bone, a relic of horror buried on cold Gloucestershire soil. So ends the architect of ruin, a lesson carved in agony, that in the end the scaffold waits for every shadow that lingers too long behind the throne. The man who once stood beside a king, whispering into the crown's ear, wielding power as if it were birthright, now lies broken in the shadow of Berkeley Castle. Shackled, filthy, he is no longer lord of England's fate, but a prisoner awaiting the machinery of vengeance. The chill of September 1327 creeps through the stone and into his bones. The rough-hewn beams above him seem to bow under the weight of history, as if the castle itself mourns or mocks. They come for him at midnight, faces masked in torchlight, voices drowned by the rising growl of the crowd. The mob outside is ravenous, pressing close, drunk on hatred and the promise of spectacle. Despenser is dragged into the open, his flesh raw from chains, his dignity long since stripped. He can smell blood, his own and that of others who fell before him. Every eye is upon him, some wide with fear, most with eager malice. There is no trial, only judgment. His mind, sharp even in terror, cannot escape the irony. The crowd's jeers are thicker than the iron at his wrists. The priest's prayers dissolve in the roar. The sentence is not mere death, but a symphony of degradation, a punishment chosen with poetic cruelty. A red-hot poker thrust into his rectum is the final instrument, a torment designed to both torture and humiliate, a symbol as much as a wound. Fire erupts inside him, unseen by the crowd, but felt in every nerve, every scream muffled by the howling masses. He is made to pay for whispers, for rumored desires, for sins real and imagined. His agony is devoured by the multitude, a feast of pain and retribution. The mutilation continues, castration, blood splattering the scaffold, the world spinning as agony floods him. The executioner's knife divides flesh, and soon Despenser is quartered, his ruined body destined for display at the four corners of the realm. The air stinks of burning sweat, fear, and the sickening sweetness of political theater. For years, stories will paint him a monster, greedy, cunning, a corrupter of kings. Centuries of chroniclers will twist his name in the same breath as damnation, reducing the living man to a warning etched in blood. Yet behind the legend stands a truth power. In England is never safe, and those who rise too high, who dare the forbidden, who court the king's favor, will find the mob waiting, torches burning, eager to tear legacy to pieces. The crowd disperses, leaving only the echo of screams and the scent of smoke. Where once stood the most powerful man in the kingdom, now lies only ruin, a testament that in the end all arrogance and privilege are devoured by fear, fire, and flesh. The scaffold stands empty, the silence returns, and so ends Hugh Despenser, undone not by sword or battle, but by the cold spectacle of justice made cruel, his power dissolved in blood and ash, his name a shadow that haunts the stones long after the flames die. A man once robed in velvet and crowned with the king's favor, who whispered secrets into the throne's ear and watched great lords grovel at his feet, now kneels in filth before a crowd howling for vengeance. Hugh Despenser, who believed himself untouchable, is shackled to rough timber, stripped and shivering beneath the autumn sky, the jeers of the mob as sharp as the iron cutting into his wrists. His former arrogance curdles to terror, pride melting away under the eyes of those who once cowered before his shadow. Around him the world has turned a wheel that grinds flesh and fortune alike. Queen Isabella and Roger Mortimer, who ordered this spectacle, stand in judgment. Yet in the darkness behind their triumph, the same fate gathers for them. Soon enough their own screams will echo against the scaffold, the same cold justice awaiting them, the same indifferent crowd thirsting for the taste of ruin. Despenser's agony is legend, his execution a ritual of public unmasking. The priest's voice falters beneath the roar of the multitude. The scent of blood and burning fat mingles with the sweat of fear and the stink of humiliation. Each agony is magnified, each wound a mark of the world's contempt as flesh is torn and the last vestiges of nobility are stripped away. He is castrated, dragged, hanged, his body made a spectacle, his shame eternal. Centuries later, the echo of his downfall still curdles the air. His name lingers in chronicles, cursed and reviled, voted the greatest villain of his age, a wraith haunting the margins of history, revived again and again in drama and tale forever, the figure of corruption incarnate. Yet the horror of that day, the crowd's merciless joy, the machinery of power grinding on these truths, are not relics. They are mirrors held before us still. Hugh Despenser's end is not simply a story of one man's fall, but a bleak vision of the world's appetite for punishment, its endless cycle of privilege and pain. The same hands that built him up rejoice to see him broken. In the shadow of the scaffold, all power withers. What remains is the spectacle of ruin, a body dangling, a name spat in the dust, and the cold certainty that the wheel will turn again.